Have you ever found yourself waking up in the middle of the night, glancing at the clock, only to see the numbers 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. staring back at you? It's as if something is tugging at your soul, pulling you from the warmth of a sleep into the stillness of the night. Perhaps you've dismissed it as just another restless night, or maybe you've chalked it up to stress, worry, or a racing mind. But what if there's something more happening in these early morning hours? What if this seemingly random interruption is actually a divine call? Could it be that God is trying to get your attention, drawing you into a sacred time where He longs to speak to your heart, reveal hidden truths, or give you peace in the midst of your worries? In ancient times, the night was divided into watches, and the hours between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. were known as the fourth watch. This was the final watch of the night, a time filled with spiritual significance. In the Bible, some of the most profound moments of divine intervention, prayer, and revelation occurred during these hours. From Jacob's wrestling with the angel to Jesus walking on water, the fourth watch is a time when God moves in powerful ways. If you've been waking during these early morning hours, you're not alone, and it's not a coincidence. This story is about Sarah, a woman who, like many of us, found herself inexplicably waking up during these quiet hours of the night. What began as a frustrating disruption soon became the most transformative time of her life. As she journeyed through sleepless nights, she discovered that God was calling her to pray, to listen, and to engage in spiritual battles she had never imagined. Through Sarah's story, you'll explore the mystery of the fourth watch, the importance of prayer and spiritual warfare, and how these moments of divine interruption can lead to life-changing encounters with God. Whether you're familiar with the concept of the fourth watch or hearing about it for the first time, Sarah's journey will encourage you to listen closely when God calls in the quiet hours. So, if you've ever asked yourself, why am I awake at this hour? Or wondered if there's a deeper meaning behind your sleeplessness, keep watching or reading. You're about to find out how these moments in the night can open a door to spiritual breakthroughs, divine guidance, and a deeper connection with God. Sarah sat upright in bed, her heart pounding in the stillness of the night. The clock on her nightstand read 3:12 a.m., and she sighed in frustration. This wasn't the first time she'd found herself awake at such an odd hour. Lately, it had been happening more and more frequently. No matter how tired she was when she went to bed, something always seemed to rouse her from sleep. Right around this time, she glanced toward the open window, where the moonlight cast a faint glow across the room. A cool breeze stirred the curtains, but the air felt heavy, almost charged with something unspoken. Sarah couldn't quite place it, but there was an unsettling feeling that gnawed at her heart. Something beyond mere insomnia. Was something wrong? In her exhaustion, she had tried everything: counting sheep, deep breathing exercises, and even scrolling through social media on her phone until her eyes were heavy again. But none of it worked. Every night, at almost exactly the same time, she was awake. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening. But what? Her mind drifted to a conversation she'd overheard at church the week before. One of the older women, known for her deep spiritual insight, had been talking about something called the fourth watch, the time between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. when spiritual activity was at its peak. Sarah hadn't thought much of it then, but now, as she stared at the clock, her curiosity was piqued. Could it be that her sleeplessness wasn't a medical issue? Could it be that God was trying to get her attention? She swung her legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cool, hardwood floor beneath her feet. There was no sense in trying to go back to sleep now. She reached for her Bible, which had been gathering dust on her bedside table. It had been a while since she'd opened it. Life had a way of pulling her in different directions, and her faith, once the center of her life, had slowly faded into the background. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was time to listen. As Sarah flipped through the thin pages of her Bible, she remembered something else from the church conversation. The fourth watch, someone had said, was not just a time for waking up. It was a time for divine encounters, for breakthroughs, for God's intervention. It was the time when Jacob wrestled with the angel and refused to let go until he was blessed. It was the time when Jesus walked on water to calm his disciples during the storm. She had dismissed it then, but now the idea felt almost urgent. Could it be that God was trying to speak to her? Her fingers stopped at Psalm 90 once, a passage she hadn't read in years. As she began to read, the words felt different, alive somehow. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. The words felt comforting, but more than that, they felt like a challenge. If God was her refuge, her fortress, why had she been so distant from him lately? Sarah realized that her life had been filled with worry and anxiety, chasing after things that never truly satisfied her. Just maybe, God was trying to bring her back, calling her out of her sleep, not just physically, but spiritually. She knelt by her bed, feeling strangely vulnerable. She hadn't prayed like this in a long time. Her prayers had become routine, distant, words she said out of habit rather than out of a desire to connect with her Creator. But tonight, she found herself whispering words that came from deep inside her. God, are you there? Are you trying to tell me something? If this is you waking me, then show me. I'm here. I'm listening. For the first time in weeks, a peace settled over her. Not the kind of peace that came from sleep, but a deeper kind. A sense that she was no longer alone in her restlessness. Over the next few nights, Sarah found herself waking again, right around 3 a.m. But instead of feeling frustrated, she now felt a strange excitement. What was God trying to show her? She had started spending these early hours in prayer, reading her Bible, and journaling her thoughts. It wasn't always easy. Some nights she felt groggy, her eyes heavy with sleep, but there was something that kept pulling her back to her knees. It was as if these hours were becoming a sacred space, a divine appointment with God. One night, as she sat in the quiet of her room, she felt an overwhelming sense of God's presence. It wasn't something she could explain, but it was real, almost tangible. Her heart raced, not in fear, but in awe. Could this be what the old woman at church had meant when she talked about divine encounters during the fourth watch? Sarah's mind drifted back to a verse she had read earlier that evening in Job 33:14-16. For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, He may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings. Was God speaking to her in these quiet hours? And if so, what was He saying? That night, as Sarah closed her eyes, she prayed one more time. God, if you're waking me for a reason, help me to understand. Show me what you want me to do. Despite the peace she had begun to feel, not everything was easy. As the nights went on, Sarah found herself battling against more than just sleeplessness. There were nights when she woke up with a sense of unease, her mind racing with worries about her job, her relationships, her future. The peace she had once felt seemed distant. One particularly restless night, she woke again at 3 a.m., but this time, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a spiritual weight that she couldn't ignore. She reached for her Bible, but before she could even open it, a thought crossed her mind. What if this is the enemy? Sarah had heard about spiritual warfare before, but had never experienced it in a way that felt real. But tonight, the battle felt intense. Her thoughts were filled with doubt, fear, and a sense of hopelessness she hadn't felt in years. It was as if someone was whispering in her ear, telling her to give up, to abandon her newfound prayer life, to go back to the way things were before. In the midst of the turmoil, she remembered something her pastor had said: the enemy always attacks when you're closest to a breakthrough. Could this be that moment? Was she on the verge of something greater, and the enemy was trying to stop her? In her heart, she knew what she had to do. She had to pray. Sarah knelt by her bed, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. The heaviness in the air seemed to grow, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. She had read about spiritual warfare, about how the enemy prowls like a lion, looking for someone to devour, Peter 5:8. But experiencing it firsthand was something entirely different. She began to pray, her voice barely a whisper at first, but as she spoke, she felt strength rising within her. This was a battle, and she wasn't fighting alone. God, I know you are with me. I know the enemy is trying to stop me, but I refuse to let him win. In the name of Jesus, I rebuke every attack against me. I declare your victory over my life, my mind, and my heart. The words flowed from her lips with more power than she had ever felt before. It was as if a new strength had been given to her, a strength that wasn't her own. She remembered the words of Ephesians 6:12, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world." She wasn't just fighting against sleeplessness or anxiety. This was a spiritual battle, and the weapons she needed weren't physical. They were spiritual. Prayer was her weapon. God's word was her defense. As Sarah continued to pray, the heaviness in the air began to lift. It wasn't an instant change, but little by little, she felt the atmosphere shift. The fear that had gripped her heart loosened its hold, and a new sense of peace washed over her. A few weeks later, Sarah found herself in a place she hadn't been in years, a place of deep, unshakable peace. The nighttime awakenings hadn't stopped, but now she welcomed them. Each time she woke up at 3 a.m., she knew it was an invitation from God to spend a time with Him. She had become more intentional about her prayer life, setting aside time not just during the fourth watch, but throughout the day. Her relationship with God had deepened in ways she hadn't expected, and she was beginning to see changes in other areas of her life as well. Her work, her relationships, her sense of purpose, all of it was being transformed. One night, as she sat in her room, reading her Bible, she came across a verse that felt like a confirmation of everything she had been experiencing. "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Isaiah 40:31. This was it. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. God had been using the fourth watch to strengthen her, to draw her closer, to equip her for the calling He had on her life. With her newfound peace and clarity, Sarah began to feel a new sense of mission. She wasn't just waking up in the middle of the night for herself. God had a greater purpose for her. Through her own journey, she realized that there were others who were also struggling, who were also being called, but didn't know how to respond. One Sunday morning, after the service, Sarah approached her pastor. Her heart raced as she explained what had been happening over the past few months: the sleepless nights, the prayers, the battles, and the breakthroughs. To her surprise, her pastor smiled warmly. "Sarah, "What you've experienced is not uncommon," he said. "In fact, I believe God is calling you to share your story. Others need to hear what you've been through. They need to know that the fourth watch is a time for them to connect with God too." Sarah was taken aback. Share her story? She wasn't a preacher. She wasn't a leader. How could she possibly share what she had been through in a way that would help others? But deep down, she knew her pastor was right. God had been preparing her for something greater, and now it was time to step into that calling. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began writing. She started a blog, sharing her experiences with waking during the fourth watch, and how God had used that time to transform her life. At first, she wasn't sure if anyone would read it, but to her surprise, the responses came flooding in. People from all over the world were resonating with her story. Some shared how they, too, had been waking at 3 a.m., but hadn't known why. Others asked for prayer and guidance on how to begin their own journey of faith. Sarah was overwhelmed, but in the best way possible. This was her new mission, to help others discover the power of prayer and divine encounters during the fourth watch. One evening, as she read through the comments on her latest post, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was what God had been preparing her for all along. Her sleepless nights had turned into a blessing, not just for her, but for countless others as well. It had been nearly a year since Sarah had first woken up at 3 a.m., confused and frustrated by her sleeplessness. Now, as she sat by her window, watching the sunrise after another fourth watch prayer session, she smiled. Her life had been transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She was no longer restless, no longer filled with the anxieties that had once plagued her. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, purpose, and joy. God had used those early morning hours to draw her closer to Him, to strengthen her faith, and to equip her for a new mission in life. And it wasn't just her life that had changed. Through her blog, her prayers, and her testimony, countless others had been touched by God's power during the fourth watch. People she had never met were now waking up to pray, seeking God in the stillness of the night, and experiencing their own breakthroughs. As the first rays of sunlight spilled across her room, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, God, for waking me up." Sarah knew that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The lessons she had learned during her journey were not just for her, but for future generations. She began to mentor young women at her church, sharing with them the importance of prayer, spiritual warfare, and listening for God's voice during the fourth watch. Each morning, as she rose from her prayers, she felt a sense of anticipation. God was still speaking, still moving, and there were more breakthroughs to come, not just for her, but for everyone who was willing to listen. The legacy of the fourth watch was spreading, and Sarah was determined to pass it on. As the years passed, Sarah continued to wake up during the fourth watch, but now it was no longer a disruption to her sleep. It was a gift. Each night, she looked forward to those quiet moments with God, knowing that He had something new to reveal to her. Her life had been transformed by those early morning hours, and she had no doubt that God would continue to use them to draw her closer, to equip her for new challenges, and to lead her into deeper revelations of His love and power. She was awake now, both physically and spiritually, and she was ready for whatever came next. If Sarah's story has resonated with you, if you found yourself waking during those early morning hours and wondering why, then I encourage you to take the next step on your own journey. God may be calling you to a time of prayer, reflection, and breakthrough, just as He did with Sarah, to continue learning, growing, and receiving more spiritual insights. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you'll be joining a community of believers who are seeking God's presence, power, and purpose in every area of life. Stay connected for more stories, teachings, and revelations that will inspire your walk with God. Together, we'll continue to seek Him in the stillness of the night and in every moment of our lives. If this video has blessed you, make sure to share and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future content. There's so much more God has in store, and I'm excited to continue this journey with you.